back. Hey, Mr. Pond Boss, tell me what to do to make
Here we go, going live.
my Lunker Lake dreams come true.
Hello, everybody. Bob Lusk, the Pond Boss. It must be Wednesday. Must be 6:30. Going live right here from the world headquarters, Pond Boss Magazine, North Texas, near Gordonville, Texas. Hey, you guys know the drill. I see Jason Nipstad up there. Good to see you, Jason. Hope things are rocking and rolling for you, man. Spring is around the corner. Get those spawning beds out. Get some of that structure and that cover out. It's time to do that. And I know as much as you love it, you're going to keep it up, keep going, keep doing it, buddy. So let's go. Let me see here. I need to find where we are. Oh, there it is. I see it. You guys know the drill. Okay, I got a brand new laptop, fellas. So let me see here. Woo-wee. I got to learn how to use this thing some more. Hey, hashtag Pond Boss Magazine in the comments section. Click like, share this video to your timeline. You'll be eligible for a drawing for a Pond Boss hat and a Pond Boss mug. I see Danny Max up to bat, Fred Bingham and John Wilson. Justin Schenk checking in from the left coast. Good to see him. Matt Hines, I see that you're on here. Good to see you guys. John Funk is around here. I don't see him on here, but I see that he's liking it and putting it up there. Good job. So guys, I thought today I'd talk about assessing ponds. I don't think we've spent much time talking about that over the last couple of years. Good gosh, you know, I've been doing this 2 years. Hi, Brad Rom. Good to see you guys. Wish y'all were here, man. We just hang out. It's a perfect night to have a campfire in the fire pit and just share some stories. I love to do that. That's fun. Roger B. Peterson Jr. Good to see you, man. Assessing a pond. John Wilson gets to do that quite a bit. John Funk says it's back from cruising the Gulf. Yeah, well, you're just in time for a winter storm, it looks like. I'm actually myself, I'm headed to upstate New York on Saturday. Going to take a client up there to tour some property so he can see what he's wanting to do. There's some good examples up there. You'll learn more about him. He checks in on this show fairly often out of Dallas. I'm not going to tell you who he is yet. That time will come. But he wants to build a ranch for hunting and fishing for wounded warriors. It's going to be called Heroes Ranch, and you'll be hearing about it as time goes by, for first responders, Gold Star families. So we're going to go look at Camp Freedom up in Pennsylvania, and we're also going to go look at a private retreat that has got some really good handicap accessible hunting. They have every year they have a couple of hunts where guys in wheelchairs bow hunt deer, and it's really pretty cool. So we're going to go look at facilities and figure a lot of that out. Let's see, Christopher Aguilar, he got here early, man. Boss must let you off work. Either that or you didn't stop by the Boudin store. Tammy, good to see you. Good to see Tammy Pisarski checking in from Lubbock, Texas. Christy Hartzell's checking in. Hey, Christy. Good to see you. What I thought I'd talk about tonight is assessing ponds. And what precipitated that thought process is Friday, I'm going to go meet with a couple of clients. One of them is really interesting to me because I went to high school with him, and he just bought 500 acres down south of Dallas. Tammy, we miss you guys too. Would love to be hanging out with you guys again. That was really fun. Steve Lewis checking in. Wonder how retired life is for Steve. Steve, man, when you start, your neck's going to start puffing up before long because the bass are going to be full of eggs, and I don't know what you're going to do then. Hey, Drew, hey, I'll be calling you here soon. I don't know if I'll get you on the phone tonight or sometime tomorrow or something, but I'm going to be ringing you. Chris, Drew just signed up to come to the Bob Lusk Institute of Higher Pondology, which is April 2, 3, and 4. And folks, we got 2 slots left. 2 slots. Because Drew's coming and bringing a brother or a cousin, or I don't think it's his dad, but somebody's coming with Drew. So there's 2 of them coming down from Pennsylvania. And on this Institute of Higher Pondology, we've got an emphasis of people that are wanting to be in the pond management business or really, really intense pond managers. Matter of fact, Drew builds lakes and ponds up in Pennsylvania. And Drew, we're going to be, I don't know that I won't have time to come see you because I got a client paying me to go up. We're going to go to Scranton and go to Camp Freedom and then circle right back, go catch a plane and come back. So you're in your office? All right. And I might ring you after this show because I want to visit with you. Let's see. Christopher Aguilar, air conditioning last night. Fire. Hey, man, you must be inside Louisiana or North Texas, either one. But anyway, on this Institute of Higher Pondology, we're going to have a pretty heavy emphasis on lake construction. And it's because, I mean, we got a couple coming from Mississippi that builds ponds. Drew's coming down from Pennsylvania. He and his dad build ponds. Andrew Scott's coming from Idaho. He's in the pond management business. So it's going to be a pretty fun few days. And if you want to know more about it, just drop me a note. Send an email to boblusk@outlook.com or info@pondboss.com, and I'll get some information for you. Hello, Bill Russell. Good to see you, man. Zach Vaughn, a buddy and I are from Central Illinois down in Texas fishing Lake Fork. It's been rough. I bet it has been rough. Man, the wind's been howling out of the west and northwest. You guys are probably got to be hanging out in the cove somewhere if you're going to try to catch a bass. But you know, you're at Lake Fork at the right time. If you want to try to catch a big fish, now's the time to be there. All right, Steve Lewis is doing his fish farming consulting. Good for you. Let's catch up. You know, you got my cell number. Ring me. Let's talk. Willie Howell, my next door neighbor, checking in. Danny Mackoff fish were crazy yesterday evening just before this norther blew in. Yeah, I bet they were feeding really, really well. Nathan Stephen Hall checking in. Okay, so let's talk about assessing ponds a little bit. When I go, these two consultations I've got on Friday, one of them is a brand new recreational landowner. He just bought 500 acres. He's getting close to retirement. He and I went to high school together in Fort Worth, and he bought some land west of Corsicana. Hey, Leo, good to see you from the left coast. And anyway, he's got an old flood prevention lake on it. Now, back in I guess this started about 1958 and ended around 1974. There were a number of watersheds around the nation that flooded, and with the way cities were growing back then, you know, once or twice a year, there would be big floods. And what really precipitated this project or this program was a flood in the late 1940s, and then on the heels of that one in the early 1950s, a flood that just filled up some downtown areas, like downtown Fort Worth, for example. So the state or the federal government threw some money out there to start building dams on the watershed creeks that feed the bigger rivers so they could slow the water down and release it slowly to build a flood prevention reservoir. That's what they are. They're called FP sites. Well, on this piece of land I'm going to go look at on Friday morning, there's about a 10 or 12 acre FP site, and when it floods, it covered up about 60 acres and releases that water really, really slowly. So this new landowner bought it thinking he could take that lake and turn it into a good fishing lake. Well, here's the catch. If it's 10 acres or so, when it doesn't flood, when it fills up, even if it doesn't run around the spillway but once every 8 or 10 years, which is probably the case with this one because I've measured the watershed, there's no habitat in it. And when those lakes were built from 1958 to 74, they were built to have a life of about 50 years. Well, 2020 minus 50 is 1970. So all those lakes, and there's literally hundreds of them, have pretty much lived their lives. Their lifespan is over. And what's happened over the years is most of them were built in agricultural areas, farms and ranches, and they're all silted in. I mean, the majority of them, I've looked at a handful of them that are in rocky areas that haven't silted in. But for the most part, they went from being maybe an average depth of 5 feet to an average depth of 3. You know, and so most of those lakes are muddy, and those that aren't are choked with plants. So trying to make one into a fishing lake is going to be a challenge. But what I did do is I looked on Google Earth, and whenever I get ready to go assess a property, the first thing I do is I question the landowner. What's the mission? You know, what are your goals? Tell me, why did you buy the property? Well, in this case, he bought it because he wants to invest some money to have an asset that when he gets into his 70s or 80s, he can either pass it to his family or have a good asset with value that he can sell. So that's what he did. But in the meantime, he wants to enjoy it. He wants his grandkids to be able to ride their UTVs around. They want to ride the Kawasaki mule. They want to go fishing. They want to see deer. They don't care much to hunt there because it's really not a premier hunting property. But it does have a couple of really nice wooded watershed areas, creeks, riparian zones, if you will, that are sitting below some areas that are typical blackland prairie. And there in that part of the country, they call it gumbo, which ain't the same gumbo Chris Aguilar eats or makes or drinks through a straw. But that blackland prairies is clay soils with some topsoil mixed, and it expands and contracts a lot. When it's wet, I mean, and if you walk across it, you grow 3 inches because you're going to get that much mud on the bottom of whatever you're wearing on your feet. So that's pretty gummy, gooey soil. So when I looked at the map, and after I talk about goals and figure out why the landowner bought the property, what's the mission, and how do they want to improve it, that gives me an idea of, are they willing to spend some money or not? Are they willing to make some improvements to improve do they want to make improvements so it's better, or they want to add value to the property? So I'm thinking about all these things as I'm asking these questions. Well, in this case, it's going to be a temporary use. He'll flip it. He may not keep it 10 years, but he bought it to put some money in, to gain value, and probably keep it 10 or 12 years. He's 64 years old. That means he'd keep it till 74, and if his family has an interest in it, then they'll end up with it somehow, whether he sells it to them or whatever. So, in the meantime, he wants to have fun, let the kids ride around, take a look at the lake, go fishing, and then as I start, so the next thing I do is I start to assess. So I'm assessing him as I'm talking to him, listening to him, and I'll meet him 8:30 in the morning on Friday, and I'll assess him some more as I'm assessing the property. But in the meantime, I'll spend some time on Google Earth. I see Zach Domback, Ron Ardoin, Michael Rosa, Tim Stewart's checking. I don't know where Tim is. You never know. I don't even know if Tim knows where he is. Mark Primo. Leo says, howdy from the wacky coast. Hey, man, I don't know how you live there, but you do. Mark Primo's checking in. Man, we got a pretty good Louisiana contingent. So then, let's see here. Aqueduct, Georgia. Holy cow, greetings. Let's see, Danny Mack, Yo Mark and Tim. Yeah, we got, see, you know what? That's one of my favorite things about the Institute of Higher Pondology is these guys have become friends. You see Danny Mack talking to Tim Stewart, checking in with Mark Primo. Those guys were all at our house, and now they're buddies. So Todd Austin, I see Todd checking in here. Bill Russell, okay, I see some, I got a question I see here I want to ask you about, or I'll talk to you about that here in a minute. I'm going to kind of stay on track about this assessing. So when I started looking at Google Earth Maps, then I start to see, because if you're going to take one of these old lakes and renovate it, you'd be talking about spending $300,000. And there's not a lot of people with that much pocket change that are willing to spend it, especially on a piece of property that they're only going to keep for 10 years, because that may be how much the property gains in value without spending any money on it. And just because you go dig out a silted in lake doesn't mean you've made that lake worth more money than it is now. And so that's kind of I can explain that. We'll do that on another show. But so what I started doing was, when I started figuring out about how much silt would need to be removed from that lake to make it a good fishing lake, and I saw that it would cost him $250,000 to $300,000, then he would have an 8 to 10 acre cleaned out flood prevention lake. He'd still have the same thing, except it's cleaned out and he spent a bunch of money on it and rehabbed it. Might be a good fishing lake. We could probably turn it into a pretty good fishing lake with that kind of money. But if he went upstream on one creek that feeds that lake, there's a watershed there big enough to build or to support an 8-acre lake, a brand new one, in a washed out draw that's wooded, and it would cost him $75,000 to $100,000 to build a brand new lake. So that's an easy decision to make. So I started looking at that, and I called him and told him about it, and he's interested to look and see. I don't think he'll spend $100,000 to build a lake, but that doesn't mean it's going to cost $100,000. So part of what we're going to do to go on Friday is assess that site, and then talk about what it would take to make the FP site a decent fishing lake. So I'm going to handle these questions right quick, and then I'm going to talk to you more about assessing lakes. Bill Russell, Bob, for the last 2 weeks, I've been finding 4 or 5 dead bluegill every day. They're from 3/8 to a ½ inch long. Are they just too young for the water temperature this time of year? Surface temperature this afternoon, 60 degrees. I'll tell you what's probably going on. Those fish that are 3/8 to a ½ inch long are probably hatched back in October or November. And they just haven't had enough food. The temperature's been a little bit too low, and they haven't been able to grow at a rate that they would have had they been hatched in April or May. So I bet you if you look at them, they're really, really thin. And now that I don't want to blow this off and say that don't be concerned, because I would be concerned enough to keep your antenna up. Keep looking at the pond. And if you see a dead one, pick it up and look at it and see if it's long and thin. If it's long and thin, it's starved to death. If it's not, there's another reason. And I don't know what it might be, or it could be another reason. So let's see here. I'm going to scroll down here on this brand new laptop. Man, last Wednesday my laptop crapped out right in the middle of the show and wouldn't boot up. It went into some kind of a funk, and the screen went blue. It said error occurred, will reboot in 29, 28, 27, black screen. Then it wouldn't boot at all. There's Harrison Davis checking in from Georgia. Let's see what Ron said. Bob, I'd like to ask everyone to keep the 2 teenage high school fishermen and father and families of these 3 from Tennessee in their prayers. I'm sure you're aware of their situation. Yes, I am. And that's that's horrific. This high school team and their sponsor were having motor issues in their boat, and so they were going to fish this tournament on the Tennessee River, I believe, and something happened, and they found their boat, but they haven't found them, which, you know, here's what I'm going to say. I'll never, ever forget hanging out with Ray Scott, the founder of BASS. This occurred probably 15 years ago. He started endorsing a PFD company. And what he did was, when I was there, he was shooting a commercial. And he had on this PFD. It's the kind that inflates when you hit the water, got the CO2 cartridge in it, little tablet that dissolves instantly, and it fills it up, and you float to the top. He shot that commercial in one take, and he was wearing street clothes. He had it on. He even had his cowboy hat on, and he pulled his cowboy hat off standing on a dock on his 55-acre lake in water that's about 12 feet deep off the end of his dock. So he pulls his hat off, pitches it to me, and I catch it, and says his lines, and then falls backwards into his lake. And in about 3 seconds, he pops right back up. And, you know, this guy's in his 70s when he did this, late 60s. So got him out of the lake, and he was going to go in to change clothes, and he turned, he pointed his finger, he says, "Pond boss," he said, "do you know why people don't wear life jackets?" And I said, "Why?" He said, "Because they haven't drowned yet. If they ever drown, they'll wear a life jacket." So guys, if you're going to be on the water, put on a life jacket, especially when you're in a boat. You know, and I don't know any of the details about that story, but the first thing that hit me was they probably didn't have life jackets on. Tate Smith, caught a few of my bluegill yesterday to see how they're looking, and they're looking amazing, big as my hand are. That's great, man. I'm glad to hear that. There's Jacob West. Good to see you there, Jacob. Frank James. Let's see here. Bob, the 101-pound rainbow trout stocked in early December have grown to 2.5 pounds, but seem to have hit a plateau now. Should I increase feeding to support further growth, or is this to be expected after the rapid start? I'll tell you what's going on. They're developing eggs. And when they develop eggs, they're going to be gaining weight with eggs less than with flesh. So they do kind of hit a plateau when they start developing eggs. By the way, the stories about pellet-fed fish being inferior eating are a lot of hooey. Yeah, you know what? If fish that are fed good, clean fish food and they're living in a good, clean pond, they're going to taste good. Greg Easley, it's almost March. What water temperature should I be looking for the yellow perch to start dropping ribbons right now? Well, let's see, I'm not sure where you are, but I'm going to tell you this. When the water temperature hits about 48 to 52. That's when yellow perch start gaining weight. I'm starting reproducing. Let's see, Jacob West, pond valve closed. Yeah, man, that's sweet. And we're finishing up some rock this week, praying for rain. Dude, it's been raining every day. That's good. Yeah, I'm looking forward to coming down and seeing what's going on. Let's see here. We got Bear Brundrett. Hello, Bear. Good to see you. Scott McClurg. And kayaks. Always rather, yeah, if you're going to be on the water, wear a life jacket. Just do it. If it's not too hot to wear, if it's too hot to wear, it's too hot to fish. Yeah, and you know what? These inflatable ones are they're so lightweight and so easy. That's what I take with me everywhere I go. So, all right. Let's see here. Let me make sure I haven't missed anything yet. I think I haven't. I think I got it. Let's take a minute for a commercial. Pond Boss Magazine. Hey, a bunch of you are subscribers, and I appreciate that. If you guys are new to Pond Boss, here it is. There's a copy of the January, February issue of the magazine. The March, April will go out in the mail here in just a few days. It's gone. But this is the January, February issue. Chock full of good information. Costs $35 a year. And that's what fuels the economy so we can do things like this show. That plus we've got great advertisers. And you know what? Tim Stewart's on here today. And you guys need to see this story right here. See that one? It's all about Tim. He renovated his Florida pond. There he is right there. There's Tim right there. Hey, Tim, you're famous, dude. Look at the mud all over that guy. I love that guy. He's got it going on. So we've got all kinds of really, really good stories. In the matter of fact, this January, February issue, I think is probably our best issue yet. So $35 a year. You know, I took Debbie out to dinner last week. We spent $48. We could have subscribed to Pond Boss. Had it for a year instead of one day. All right, there's I see Leanne checking in. Hey, Leanne, we need to do a drawing. We haven't had a drawing in a while. Help me remember to do that. You know, guys, if you'll do hashtag Pond Boss Magazine, click like, share this video to your timeline now. You'll be eligible for a drawing for a Pond Boss hat and a Pond Boss mug. My little trademark statement is this little Pond Boss mug knows how to keep hot things hot and cold things cold. I don't know how it knows, but it does. So let's talk about assessing ponds. So what I'm going to do on Friday with my old high school buddy is I'm going to go look at it and just see if it's a typical flood prevention lake. And I've worked on several of them in that area, and I got a feeling I know what it's going to look like. It's going to have a dam that sits above the water line at least 30 vertical feet with a concrete overflow spillway on it. And when it backs up, it's going to back up into a wooded creek, but normally it's going to be sitting down low where there is no structure, no habitat, no cover. Well, in order to make a lake like that a good bass lake, you got to add structure and cover. Well, here's the problem. If the average depth is 3 or 4 feet, that means there's a rectangular shaped pit right in front of the dam where they took the dirt to build the dam back in 1965 or whenever it was. You know, and so there's one hole that's deep where fish can live, and that's probably going to be the only productive area for the kind of fish that people want to catch. So I don't know, you know. Now we might be able to turn that into like a hybrid striped bass lake, with the caveat that I want to know what fish are there. Odds are there's trash fish in it. Trash fish to me means carp, buffalo. Probably some gizzard shad and I use gizzard shad in the right circumstances, but in a case like that, gizzard shad really are not helpful. So I'm probably going to talk to him more about building a new lake if he's not interested in that, which I don't know yet. Then we'll talk about the few things that we can do with that lake. But to really get in there and figure out what to do with it, I need to know about the water chemistry, which I know those soils, so I got a good idea about the water chemistry. I want to see if his water's got any color, if it's turbid. If it's turbid and muddy, there's a reason for it. And I want to assess that. I'll probably collect a water sample, send it off to Texas A&M Soil Sciences Lab. $25, takes 2 weeks, got a good water chemistry analysis back in my hands and tells me what we have to work with. The other thing I would do if I were when I'm getting ready to go actually assess the lake is I would go electrofish it, study the bottom contours with a depth finder to see what the depths really are. And when we electrofish it, we want to study the fish. So I'm going to talk to you about how you can assess your lake. So, let's see here. Andrew Willis. Hello, just got the pond dam fixed in a 50-year-old pond. How would I get rid of the beaver? Well, a Conibear 330 does a pretty good number on beavers. And just about, if you have beavers, you have a trapper somewhere. I would get in touch with the trapper because their fees are really not unreasonable compared to the damage that those animals do. Nuisance animals can do quite a bit of damage. They'll eat your trees. You know, beavers are going to chop down your trees. If it's a hardwood tree and a young beaver, they'll girdle it and kill a hardwood tree. I've seen countless numbers of oaks, you know, this big around, maybe 25 or 30-year-old oaks, girdled all the way around, dead. But the beavers can't chew through the hardwood. They'll eat willows, they'll eat cottonwoods, they'll eat sycamore trees, you know. And then beavers aren't quite as notorious for burrowing as other animals are, like nutria. Muskrats do some, depending on where you live and what the muskrats need. You know, but what they will do is they will take up residence on your place and cut down a bunch of trees. So the best way to get rid of the beaver is to trap them. And the way you trap them, beavers are creatures of habit. They're going to use the same slide, and they're going to come in about dusk, do their work. Now, if they don't reside where your lake or pond is, they're going to move. They're going to be on the, and they'll travel up to a quarter of a mile a night to go cut down trees and drag limbs back to build their den. You know, so they'll go a long distance in order to eat. And of course, the way they eat is they're eating the cambium layer around the tree. So they'll get under the bark and they get their nutrition from that next layer right under the bark, because they got bacteria in their gut that dissolves that and digests it. That's where they get their food from. Danny Mac fell into this pond, but it didn't have any water yet. I'm just going to leave that comment right where it belongs. I don't see you wearing a sling or walking around with crutches. Looks like you might have been okay then. Shane McIntyre. Hey, Shane, good to see you, man. Glad to see you joining up with us today. Tom Davis from Ohio. Good to see you, Tom. So now, what we'll end up doing with this first stop on Friday is coming up with a game plan based on his goals and what I see. Now, here's what my eyes see. My eyes are going to look at what the water looks like. It's going to look at the shape of the lake. Literally the shape of the lake. Is it shaped like a molar Bruce Condello might pull out of my jaw? Or is it shaped like a teardrop? You know, or is it shaped like a chicken's foot? So I want to see the shape of the lake. That's going to give me an idea as to its potential for habitat improvement. I want to take a water sample and get the water checked. I want to see the kinds of trees that are growing around it. I want to see accessibility to it. Have there been cattle walking around it, beating down the shores for years and years and years? I want to see all that. Now, all these FP sites, the dams are fenced off from cattle. Cattle cannot get on the dam. That's one of the rules when those dams were built. Keep cows off so they wouldn't beat them down so where they could erode and blow out. So that's a pretty big deal. Let's see here. Roger B. Peterson Jr. in Missouri, where I send water to be analyzed. Should I send it to Texas A&M? You know, the land-grant colleges all have water labs, but the reason I chose A&M is not because I went there, because I did. It's because they have the most thorough water analysis for the best price that I can find. It's $25. If you will go to their Soil Sciences webpage, there's all kinds of analysis you can have done on soil, plants, and look at the one that says water. And there's a form you fill out. You send a check for $25 along with a water sample, and they'll email you the results. And once you get those results, if you don't quite understand them, get me involved, and I'll help you. I'll help tell you what it means. So yeah, I prefer A&M. I do, just because they're thorough and they're inexpensive and they give us a good starting point. So now, once we come up with a game plan, then we'll execute the plan. So I'll tell him what some of his options are that he can do with the lake. But in order to do those options, we're going to have to learn more about the lake. I want to see what the bottom looks like. I want to study the fish. I want to study the lay of the land, so to speak. Does it have any aquatic plants? Now, this time of year, you're not going to see any aquatic plants at all. You're not going to see them at all. So because it's just too early in the season, but I'm going to tell him to be on guard for that. If the water's clear, he's going to have plants when the summer shows up or when the spring shows up. So that's where we'll start. Now, I've got a second one later on in the day, about 2 hours west of him, over near Meridian, Texas, where an amazing couple have just bought the property that they want to retire on. Now, they live in the Austin area, and the husband is retired military, and now he works doing logistical type stuff for another company. He's been with them for 20 years. So he's approaching retirement age, and he and his bride want to have a place where they can escape the city and have a place when they get ready to retire, they can retire to if they like. So that's going to be the second stop. Let's see what Shane McIntyre said. Oh my gosh, I'm late. I stumbled across one of your conference videos on bass myths, and now I'm hooked. You know what, guys? If you haven't seen that video on bass myths, I'm kind of partial to that. That video was shot, and you'll find it at the bassresource.com website. And that video was shot, golly, probably 10 years ago at one of their road trips, I think, at, what's the lake on the Kentucky Lake. It was shot at Kentucky Lake. And I've watched that video myself a few times, and even though I preach that stuff, it's good to kind of hear that refresher, even when I said it. It's kind of weird, isn't it? But anyway, that's a pretty good one. I'm just an avid fisherman, and I feel like everything you talk about or say is pure gold. It speaks to my heart. Keep up the good work. Hope to meet you one day. By the way, I've watched every one of your videos on YouTube, some of them twice. You've lost your mind, dude. I mean, I'm flattered by that, but I can't even watch those videos. Jeez, I've got so many of those things now. I mean, I've got 2 years worth of this, so that's what? That's 24, so probably 20. No, heck, that's every week. That's 50, probably 50. Gosh, I probably got 80 or 90 videos of this show, plus videos that I've shot over time that are on YouTube as well. Let's see. Michael Gray's checking in. Hey, Michael, good to see you, buddy. Christopher Aguilar, did you say powder lime or granulated to add to an existing pond and water clarity? You know what? If you're going to use lime to help, now be sure when you use lime that you know what kind of lime you're using. I prefer ag lime, and I prefer granular ag lime. It's calcium carbonate, and when you put it out in the pond, I like to put it in piles, or if you can broadcast it evenly over the whole pond, it'll sink to the bottom, react with the soils, and dissolve into the water. That's the mission. Now, most powdered limes are going to be quick lime or hydrated lime, which is calcium hydroxide, and that stuff is volatile and can change the pH of your pond really, really, really fast. So I don't know that I would use ag lime, and I prefer the granular kind because I'm trying to help stabilize the water chemistry so that it can stabilize its growth in whatever's hanging out in it, which includes clay. Sometimes with lime, you can cause clay to settle out. Sometimes you can't. If lime doesn't do the job, you can put it in there all day long, won't make any difference. You got to get something else that has a different chemical reaction like gypsum. Ag lime is calcium carbonate, gypsum is calcium sulfate. If you've ever seen a piece of broken sheetrock, that's calcium sulfate. That's gypsum. And if that doesn't work, then you can look at alum, which is aluminum sulfate. But listen to me, don't do that by yourself. You need to use somebody that's been there and done it, or you're going to kill all your fish. And it can happen within 15 minutes. Just believe me. Don't ask me how I know. I know. All right, so now then, Harrison Davis says, to determine how much nutrients is actually in the water, what parameters would I want my extension service to test for? What would be the ideal measurement parts per million? Well, you know what? There's books written on that, so I'm going to give you the short version real quick. Then we're going to go back to assessing ponds. First of all, you need to know the alkalinity. Now, everybody wants to know the pH, and that's important, but it doesn't tell you why. It tells you what. pH of 7 tells you the water's neutral. A pH of 8 tells you the water's basic. pH of 6 tells you the water's acidic. pH of 5 tells you that it's 100 times more acidic than 7, but it doesn't tell you why. So that's when I start looking at it, and I like A&M because they'll give you some parameters of cations compared to anions. So in other words, they'll show you how many parts per million calcium you've got, how much magnesium, iron, and on down the line, manganese, magnesium. Then they start showing you so that there's another one, potash. What is it? Potassium. So that's a positive ion. That's a cation. Then they show you sulfates, phosphates, carbonates. And so it's most important to look at your alkalinity. That's the most important part. As long as it's 40 parts per million or higher, that's good. But if you've got some underlying issues where your water's muddy, there's probably an imbalance of cations to anions. And that shows you on that Texas A&M report. You can look at the bottom of the report and it shows you the balance of cations and anions. And that's going to help you decide if you want to do something about it. Now, I don't want to get into a whole lot of detail about that because that'll take 3 hours. And I'm getting out of here at 7:30. Got a granddaughter dance lessons tonight. So Harrison says, water clarity in my pond is over 5 feet in July. Well, I think that's really a good idea to be looking at your alkalinity. If your alkalinity is 40 parts per million or higher and your water's still clear, then your nutrients are low. Now you can look at nitrogen in the form of nitrates, and you can look at phosphorus in the term of and with phosphates in a water chemistry test. But here's the thing: send that water in now if it's clear, because what happens, and I'm not going to call them false readings, but if you take a water sample of your water in July at 5 feet and you send that in and it shows to be minimal phosphorus, but you're not taking into consideration that you're 40% covered with aquatic plants, then the reading is going to be misleading because your phosphorus is tied up in that plant life. And so if you were to add phosphorus into a lake that's full of plants, you're going to fertilize the plants and make things worse. So it's a chemistry biology balance. You know, there are times we'll see low numbers of phosphorus is parts per million is kind of low because the phosphorus is being used. It's tied up in algae or tied up in plankton or it's tied up in rooted plants or coontail or something like that. So there's Joseph Reynolds checking in. Hey man, good to see you. So now, this second thing I'm going to do, let's see. Bill Russell says, Bob, for the last 2 weeks I've been finding 4 or 5 dead bluegill. Okay, I think we did that one. Yeah, okay. All right, so now I'm kind of getting mixed signals here on this deal. I want to make sure that I'm not missing something here. Yep, okay, I think I got it. Okay, so on this second one, which these folks, when I talked to the lady, she was telling me where the property is. I found it on Google Earth, started looking at the map, and they've got about a 4 or 5 acre lake that looks like it was built by the prior landowner. It's not a real old lake. I went all the way back to 1995, and it wasn't on there until like 2000. So it's a 20-year-old lake. I guess it's got 20 years on it. So, but it was built for the purpose of capturing water for a fishing lake. So I'm hoping whoever built it 20 or 25 years ago, whenever they built it, built some amenities there. And one thing that's really cool, it's about 2 miles away from a property that I helped manage back from 1986 until about 1996 when the landowner, the property changed hands. And we built 3 really fun. It was the very first, honest to gosh, 20-acre fishing lakes that I got to help design. I mean, one of them's got an island in the middle of it shaped like a wedding cake. It's layered, coming up. This landowner had fun. It's got 2 cypress trees growing out the top of that island, and that was 1990 or 91, maybe 89, 90 through there somewhere. And I know that the local earth movers, their learning curves were steep, just like mine was, and learning some of the finer points of designing the perfect bass fishing lake. Well, this property is less than 2 miles away, and it was built shortly after those lakes were built. So I'm hoping that lake was built for the purpose of fishing. And looking at it from Google Earth, it looks like it is. So I'm going to meet with them for the initial consultation on Friday afternoon. And it's a husband and wife. The husband travels quite a bit because he's with this logistics company. And they're opening new stores, things like that. So he's bouncing around the country. He's going to fly in Thursday, and we're going to meet on Friday and drive over the property. And the goals are, I bought this place that I want to retire on. I want to turn it into something like a legacy property, so I'm willing to spend some money on it. And he wants to make that a really cool fishing lake for a bunch of his retired buddies. He spent 20 years in the Air Force. He was a fighter pilot, I think. I'll find that out Friday. I think I'm right. And then he'll and he wants to entertain some of his buddies from the military, which I think that's cool. So not only are we going to go talk about the lake, we're going to talk about how to use it. What kind of dock does he need? What kind of equipment does he need? Does he need a fire pit right next to the lake? That sort of thing. So we're going to talk about how to experience it. But when it comes to assessing the lake, I'm going to be looking at things like water depths. He's got a boat, so we're going to go out in the boat, I hope. We're going to see what kind of plants that there might be left over from the winter, because we've had a real mild winter. I want to see how much shallow water there is. Here's what I do. This is the way I assess a lake. There's 5 things I want to focus on. And I've got different tools for each one. Number 1 is, what's the water like? We got to have happy water. If we don't have happy water, these other 4 things don't matter. And I'm going to give them to you in the order of their importance. All right? So if you're taking notes, this is something to write down. Hi, Tom Hollowell. Shane McIntyre, and Scott McClurg, would testing just after ice out makes it? Yes, it would. So I'll hit yours as well. So here's the 5 things. Now that y'all have a pencil and a Big Chief tablet, water's first. That's the most important thing. If you don't have happy water, let me tell you what happy water is. Happy water is stable. The pH doesn't go like this, which means if you've got an alkalinity of 40 parts per million or higher, your pH is not going to rise and fall like that. It's going to that alkalinity is a measure of calcium carbonate. That is an antacid. That's a buffering capacity. That is the Rolaids of your lake. It's a good way to describe it. It's the Rolaids or the Tums or Prilosec of your lake that helps stabilize the pH. Because pH going up and down, even though that's an indicator, that's a problem for fish. If fish are trying to worry about the water they're living in, none of this other stuff makes any difference. So I've done a number of videos. We've had several talks about water. You can go back and find those. But you want happy water. The second thing is habitat. My little catchphrase is, as goes the habitat, so goes what lives in it. If you don't have good habitat, then you're not going to have a good fishery. Now, here's the way I drive that home. Fishing at Lake Fork. Lake Fork has got the habitat. If I said, hey, let's go somewhere where we got a shot at catching a double-digit bass, which is why they're fishing Lake Fork right now. Right now is your best shot at catching a double-digit largemouth bass at Lake Fork. And Lake Fork is notorious for that. So Lake Fork has the habitat to grow big fish like that, or it wouldn't do it. It also has the habitat to grow the bait fish that those fish need to eat. Now, Lake Fork also, that not many people know, has got perfect habitat for fish called yellow bass, which are look like little bitty sand bass, about that big, except they're kind of golden yellow color. And they can devastate the small end of a forage population. So they're really not helping the largemouth bass. They're competing with them at the bottom of the food chain, which means Lake Fork must have enough habitat to provide the forage fish that the fish need on up the food chain. So, happy water, the best habitat. Now, habitat, not only target habitat for the fish you want to catch, it takes 10 pounds of bait fish for a game fish to gain 1 pound. Matter of fact, it takes 10 pounds of bait fish or food for a bluegill to gain a pound. It takes 10, conversion at every trophic level is about 10 to 1. So we also need to supply habitat for those kind of bait fish, which that may be threadfin shad, maybe bluegill. Bluegill are the backbone of every bass fishing lake across the nation. In the south, it works better than it does in the north, which is another story. But bluegill to the backbone. Red ear sunfish spawn between bluegill spawns. So if you have the right kind of habitat for bluegill, threadfin shad, red ear sunfish, if you have golden shiners, same thing. At some point, if you're trying to grow big bass like Lake Fork has, Lake Fork is gizzard shad, and that's the #1 food for big bass. It's gizzard shad and other bass. So you got to have great water, great habitat for all sizes of all species. Like, for example, if I said, hey, let's go fishing for stripers, where would we go? Right there. Right here, Lake Texoma, 5 miles from me, because that lake is perfect. It's one of the few places, it's one of only 2 places in the entire nation where striped bass can spawn naturally and not be near salt water. So, and they do, and they spawn going up the Red River almost every year. So, as goes the habitat, so goes what lives in it. If I said, hey, let's go troll 60 feet deep for a 30-pound lake trout, ain't gonna be anywhere around here. It's gonna be the Great Lakes, or we're going to Canada, So it's all because of that water with that habitat. And that habitat supplies the needs for a variety of sizes of a variety of species of fish. So that's real important. The next thing is the food chain. In our ponds and lakes, we can manage the food chain. We can manage them like what Frank James does by feeding the fish. If you feed the fish, then you have a bigger crop. I see Justin Hansard checking in. He's our county agent over in Montague County and good friend. Good to see you, Justin. Hey, when you have those kids fishing, make sure they're wearing a PFD, man. And I know I don't need to tell you that. You already know it. I'm telling it for everybody else. Justin is one of the sponsors and takes high school kids fishing in fishing tournaments. So now we got good water, great habitat, and the food chain. Takes 10 pounds of bait fish for a game fish to gain a pound. So if you don't have a good food chain, you can pretty well forget about the end gain I'm going to get to here in a minute. Good water, good habitat, good food chain. Then if you're going to try to grow big fish, you need the best genetics you can get. You can talk to deer people. If you want this, you got to have the right genetics with deer. Same concepts with fish. Then the 5th concept is harvest. Look at your pond like a garden. You're going to build it, nurture it, stock it, feed it. At some point, you got to harvest some fish. Because if you don't, then growth rates are going to level off and begin to decline. They're going to overeat the food chain. It's a balancing act. Game fish, forage fish. It's a balancing act. And when you got that going on, then you manage that by feeding the forage fish and culling the game fish. And you can selectively harvest the game fish based on the sizes that you want your fish to become. If you want a balanced fishery, harvest a balanced size range of fish. So, as I'm assessing lakes, I'm trying to figure out where are we on each piece of that puzzle. Now, we can take each one of those pieces, like harvest, for example, we can drill way down far deep into that. Let's just say the folks I'm going to see Friday afternoon with a 4, 5, 6 acre lake, they want to harvest a few fish, but they also want to grow. They want to have a chance of catching some 6 or 8 pound bass. Then once the bass hit about 18 inches, they need to preserve them. Leave them in. So odds are going to be that they're going to be having a harvest slot of fish that range in size from 10 inches to about 14 inches. And we'll give them a number. If they don't mind feeding the fish and they've got bluegill, then we'll give them a number of about 20 to 25 per acre. So they can take out anywhere from 80 to 100 fish throughout the course of a year and help the lake. Make room for younger fish coming up, make more food available for bigger fish that are growing larger. So whenever I go assess this second place, I'm going to be looking at things through a little bit different lens. I'm going to be looking at it from how can they experience it, but the shape of the lake, and I'm going to look at the 5 things, plus I'm going to throw in looking at depths. I want to know how deep the water is, and here's why. Plants grow in shallow water. That's the way it works. Shallow water is habitat for aquatic plants. So I want to see what they've got in terms of shallow water, then project what they will probably have with aquatic plants. And at that point, then we'll come up with a game plan, a management strategy. So when we assess, if you're going to assess and you want to assess the fishery, go catch a bunch of fish, weigh them, measure them, make sure you've identified them properly. I can't tell you how many times somebody will send me a picture of some fish that they caught in a trap, and they got them in a net, and they'll say, I've got a bunch of these bluegills. Are these the right sizes? And when I blow the picture up, it's full of green sunfish. So knowing the species of fish is pretty important to make management decisions. So you need to catch some fish, weigh and measure them, and also identify as many species as you can. I told a story, matter of fact, I wrote about it in this issue of Pond Boss. If you want to read about it, email us. We'll send you a copy of this magazine. Just subscribe to it if you don't mind. Where they'd been fishing for bass and thought they had to bring in brand new landowners. They know nothing about the outdoors, and they know nothing about fishing other than the son, who's in college, is determined to be a great angler. So he targeted bass. And so he sent me pictures of these really nice bass before we go electrofish the lake. So when we got there, we were shocking up carbon copy cookie cutter 10 to 14 inch bass. I said, well, don't you ever catch any of those? Oh yeah, we catch those all the time, just don't take any pictures. Oh, okay. Well, we shocked up some crappie. We shocked up some big bluegill that looked like they'd been fed, which in fact they had 6 years ago. And now they're at the very end of their lives on these bluegill. And there's very few fish in the middle-sized classes. Quite a few that are 2 to 3 inches long coming up to take their place. But those fish, knowing what I know, they're at the end of their lives. When you got a 9-inch bluegill whose eyes are bugged out and he's about 2/3 of what he should weigh because he hadn't been fed in a few years because his place had been neglected, then you can pretty well bet they're going to go away. So if you want to assess your lake, and they had crappie, they had no idea they had any crappie in there. And they thought they had some bluegill, but they didn't know. Now they do. Because we went in and using the electrofishing boat, we were able to capture a bunch of different sizes of fish. In the lake, each one of those ponds was about 40% covered with coontail. And even though the bass were underweight, the coontail was loaded with bait fish. Absolutely loaded with bait fish. Because they could hide in there. And when you've got 40% of a pond covered with bait fish, bass can't get to them to eat them. The bass lose weight. So, part of our assessment there was you got too much coontail. Coontail's invasive. Both those ponds were designed as fishing ponds. So they've got all kinds of stick-ups. They've got timber. They've got piles of rocks and brush. Really good habitat. So assessing the habitat is a big, big deal. If you don't have the habitat for your end goals, you're not going to reach those goals. Now let that, that's kind of arrogant to say let that sink in, but let it sink in. Because if you don't have the habitat, here's one of my catchphrases. You can't money whip a lake or a pond into being something it doesn't want to be. You can't. You can spend, I've watched guys pour wads of money trying to make a lake better by stocking fish, where when they quit doing that, the lake reverts right back to what it was when they first started. Happens every time. And it's all because they either don't have happy water or the right kinds of habitat. They're not managing their food chain like they should. You can't money whip a food chain. You got to be able to, you can supplement it. You can add crawfish. You can add rainbow trout like what Frank James did. You can add minnows from time to time. Just don't use fatheads. They're a waste of money in a existing pond or a lake. But if you can't establish and manage and maintain a reproductive food chain, you're not going to get the results that you want. That's why Lake Texoma is such a good striped bass lake. They can reproduce in the lake. And the lake is notorious for growing hundreds of millions of threadfin shad and gizzard shad. And guess what stripers eat? They live in the same zone as threadfin shad do in open water, and they're chasing them all day long. So as long as you got all those elements together, you're going to have a good fishery. So let's see here. I'm going to scroll back down so you can catch up with some of these questions here. Let's see here. Shane McIntyre says, let me see here. Y'all bear with me. I do fish a pond, probably 5 to 8 acres that my friend owns. He swears he used to have big bass, but the 2 years I've been there, I've never caught one over 12 inches. Most of the bluegill we catch are just at 10 or bigger, and unfortunately, he hasn't let anyone remove any fish. Is this a result of that? Yes, it is, because here's what happens. Let's see the rest of the question. What should be done first, in your opinion? Remove some bass and or bluegill, or both, because it seems like the bluegills are too big for the bass to compete with at this point. Okay, here's what happens. When a lake is first stocked, the fish grow at exceptional rates, and those first stocked fish get to grow to sizes that most fish coming behind them will never achieve. You know, the state record largemouth bass in Texas is 18.18 pounds. That bass was caught in 1992, 28 years ago. It was in its 14th year at Lake Fork. It was one of the first stocked fish in Lake Fork, or first hatch. It was the first generation. That's why it got to be that big. So what happens is, fish are just like any other animal, like us. They have a lifespan. A Florida strain largemouth bass will live 12 to 14 years, maybe 15 at the most. By the time it is 14, it's starting to deteriorate and lose weight. Northern largemouth bass, 6 to 8 years in southern waters, but up to 15 or 18 in northern waters. There's been some northern largemouth bass documented in Illinois, northern Illinois, to make it to over 20 years of age, tagged when young and documented. You know, but they have a finite number of heartbeats. Florida bass in the south, 12 to 14 years. Northern strain bass, 6 to 8. So in this lake, here's what I imagine happened, Shane, is over the first 5 or 6 years, it was a great fishing lake. And I bet if you go check the age of this lake, it's at least 10 years old, probably older. So once these first fish stocked grow up and start to age out, by year 3, they're reproducing. They're replenishing themselves and filling a void in there. So by the time they hit 8, 9, 10 years old, if they're Florida bass, and I don't know where you are, I don't remember, but by the time those bass start to get older, they've got bukus, big numbers of fish that are waiting to take their place. But the problem happens when they reproduce and you get lots and lots, a lot of young fish that aren't harvested. There's not enough big bass to feed on those little bass to keep them thinned out, numbers thinned out enough to where there's enough of those growing up to get to the junior varsity, headed to the varsity. So what happens is you get all these young fish in year 3. By year 4, 5, and 6, they've leveled off and they're not growing anymore. And that's probably about where they're going to top out unless you start culling some. Here's the answer. Holy cow, it's 7:27 already. Woo, this has flown by. So what you need to do is you need to be culling all the bass under 14 inches that you can. Every one of them. Don't worry about throwing any back. For now. Now, that's in a lake that's seriously overcrowded. The reason the bluegill are so big is they're not getting a chance to have survival reproduction because all those crowded, stunted bass are eating the babies. So if you'll start culling some bass, and in a 5 to 8 acre lake, you're going to need to take 120 to 180 bass out before you'll see a difference. If you'll do that, start feeding the bluegill, you'll see a difference. So let's see. Shane says, let me see here. I'm going to answer these questions and then get out of here. Shane says, I'm not sure when it was stocked originally, but I believe it's been a while because the DNR is who stocked it, and I'm not sure when they stopped doing that or even if, I don't know what state you're in, but some of the DNR still do, but most of them don't. And those that do, there's some restrictions. Matt Reardon, for a brand new pond, is it important to start aeration right away? No, it's not. It's important to start aeration as the pond ages. Because what you want to do is, as the pond ages, it collects nutrients at the bottom. And you want to be able to recycle those nutrients to get them back up in the water column instead of letting them settle all the way to the bottom or under the thermocline. Plus, aeration helps give autonomy to the water chemistry and the water biology top to bottom. So, I plan on adding it the second year when I can afford a good one for my budget. You know, with a 1.5 acre pond, that's a good idea. Do it in the second year. You might even be able to wait to the third year, depending on how green your water turns this summer. That's how I'd make that choice. Ron says, Toledo Bend is getting tougher each year because they're changing the habitat by killing all the grass to try to eliminate salvinia and other invasive species. You know, I can see that. I can also tell you that as the habitat shifts, the fishery shifts. Because the survival of the fittest, basically. Whatever habitat's left, that's going to be conducive to the growth of the fish that thrive in that habitat. So when they take these plants out, and there's a bunch of just open, muddy flats, gizzard shad thrive in that. But when there's plants growing in it, bait fish thrive in that. Just as an example, living example. There's Drew Hayes says, you're making me want to get an out-of-state license when we come down and try some of these lakes. Man, it'd be worth it for you guys to budget a couple of extra days and go striper fishing, man. I know all the guides. It only costs $12. A license, a Lake Texoma license is $12, and I think that's all you need. You might look that up. Look up Lake Texoma fishing license, Drew. Ben Classically's checking in. Ben's a fisheries guy. So let's see here. Tate Smith. Wouldn't green sunfish also be good food for the bass? You bet. Green sunfish would be good food for bass. The problem with green sunfish is they have a little bit bigger mouth than bluegill, so they can actually eat young of the year bluegill, and they only spawn once a year. Where bluegills in the south especially spawn 4 to 6 times a year, 4 to 5 times a year. So bluegill are the backbone of the food chain because they can reproduce so much to keep things rocking and rolling. Let's see, Shane McIntyre in Iowa. Okay, all right. So in Iowa, let me go back here and see. You know what? I don't know that Iowa still gives away fish. I don't know that. Let's see here. Y'all hang with me a minute. We're going to go a little bit longer. Scott McClurg up in Nebraska. So we had coontail, then sago real bad the last couple of years. Once they got that under control, our bass got fat within a month or two. That makes sense because those bait fish were congregated in that vegetation. When you take it out, they're free and they get eaten and bass gain weight. Even under the ice, they have big bellies. This is in a half-acre, 6 to 7 foot maximum depth pond. Can't agree more about happy water and controlling plants and cover. Yep, that's it. Harrison Davis, another quality show. Thanks a lot, man. And Shane says, and that pond is actually an old creek they dammed up. As it gets deep, it's 25 feet. They actually created 3 ponds out of this one creek. Yeah, so it's shaped like a chicken foot. I see Tim Wood and Greg Grimes checking in here at the end. Hey, guys, I'm about to sign off. Greg, I saw your Facebook post about blowing out on the interstate last night. You know, my mama, I'm going to close with this. My mama always said to me as I was growing up and things wouldn't go just exactly as planned, she'd say, son, if it ain't one thing, it's another. And you know what? It took me to my 30s to really understand what that means. If it ain't one thing, it's another. Well, I used to fret over that, and it used to wear me out. I would get worried. You know, I'm 60, almost 65 years old, and see my hair color? It ain't changing much. Now I'm a little greener. I'm a little gray around the temples. That's part of being 65. But I stopped worrying about stuff because now I expect things like that. One of the guys hauling fish the other day for American Sport Fish that bought me out of my pond management side, one of the axles came loose off of a fish trailer and twisted sideways and got wedged under the trailer on an interstate. And used to, stuff like that would just send me into orbit. My blood pressure would go up. My heart rate would go up. Even if I wasn't there, the minute I found out about it, man, I would get emotional about that. But the more I learned about my mom saying, if it ain't one thing, it's another, she's right. And you just got to learn to expect stuff, prevent as much as you can, you know, and there you go. Yes, sir. All right. Well, hey, thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate you hanging a few minutes late with me. Good questions tonight. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you guys next Wednesday. So until then, adios.